Michigan football is back. The Big Ten champs return to the Big House tomorrow, April 2nd at noon Eastern. BTN will be broadcasting the spring game for the Michigan Wolverines. Definitely worth taking a look here. I'm here to bring you 3 things that I'm going to be watching for during the Michigan spring game. Let's dive right into it. Number 1 here, cohesion on the offensive line. Pretty confident that the 2022 offensive line squad for Michigan is going to be a very good unit. You keep your left tackle with Ryan Hayes, have both your guards, Trevor Keegan, Zach Zinter. You are losing your right tackle, Andrew Stuber, to the NFL draft. Main loss here, in my opinion, is your veteran center, Andrew Vistardis. You are bringing in a couple guys with experience. UVA grad transfer Victor Oluwatimi at center. Open competition at right tackle. It could be Trent Jones. He saw a lot of time as the 6th offensive lineman, kind of in jumbo packages. So those are 2 positions to watch, especially with the new center, though. There's a lot of opponent-independent things to look at. What are the blitz pickups looking like? Does he have command of the offensive line when pressure looks are showing before the snap? Double teams between the center and the guards. What is that spacing? What does that timing look like, right? A lot of those things are opponent independent. You can learn a lot just by focusing on the singular offensive line unit. What does the depth look like as well, right? You need rotational pieces on the offensive line, debatably more important there than anywhere else on the football field. So you need those rotational pieces. Guys like Carson Barnhart, Greg Crippen at the interior offensive line, and then El Hadi, Jeff Percy, backup tackles. You got some young guys, Tristan Bounds, one example coming up as well, that you'd like to see how they would perform as the 2nd or 3rd unit there. All right, moving to number 2 here, safety play. You're losing a veteran like Brad Hawkins. Feels like he's been in a Michigan Wolverines uniform for forever. Losing one of your best athletes in the secondary in Daxton Hill. Do the replacements now, do they look like they know where they need to be, right? Safety is a position where you don't really want to see them on the television. If they're doing their job, quarterback isn't even going to sniff around their direction, right? So are they comfortable in that position, commanding the rest of the defense? RJ Moten, a guy who contributed a bit last year, he's going to be in a much more elevated role. He's been made available to the media. Obviously, the team is comfortable with him in that elevated role. Seems like he's going to be a mainstay here. How comfortable is he going to be replacing a veteran like Brad Hawkins? Makari Page, another guy we saw as a true freshman, not as much last year. He got some spot time. He's going to need to elevate his play. Keon Sabb, a true freshman coming in, really highly ranked, and he's going to be getting some time as well. You have a couple injuries with Rod Moore, Jane McBurrows. They're out this spring. So you're going to have a position change from Mike Sainristil over from wide receivers into the safety room as well. Will he be the first guy at nickel cornerback, or will you see a guy like Will Johnson kind of step in there? So lots of questions, especially at the safety position with the nickel and replacing some great athletes, some great veteran presence that Michigan's had as of late. You can see some fresh faces and guys that really need to elevate their game there. And again, a lot of this, if you see busted coverage, if you see people out of alignment, that's opponent independent. And those are the types of things in a spring game that you can really pick up on where you're like, yeah, they need a little bit more work ahead of the 2022 season. Finally, number 3 here, defensive line replacements. 2 things I'm pretty confident about heading into the 2022 season for Michigan Wolverines. Number 1, offensive line is going to be pretty solid. I mentioned that in the first point that I had here. And then number 2 here, defensive line will take a step back. So for number 2 here, you're losing Aiden Hutchinson, right? One of Michigan's best defensive linemen, debatably ever. You're also losing David Ojabo, an exceptional talent. He was projected top 10 in the NFL draft. You're not going to replace that pass rush ability right away. You're also losing a guy like Chris Hinton on the interior, important piece as defensive tackle. So how are you going to deal with all those losses, right? There's going to be a lot of new faces there. Mozzie Smith, one of the few guys that does have experience, and it's about time that he's really going to be elevated in his role, especially on the interior there. Watching him work on the inside against what should be a very strong interior offensive line, that'll be must-see for the spring game. And what does Michigan have on the outside, right? You got Taylor Upshaw. Mike Morris has gotten a lot of hype this spring. Chris Jenkins, a guy who really flashed. I personally think he's going to be one to break out this year. Then you have young guys like George Rooks, Rayshon Benny. Going in their 2nd year in the program, they should be able to take a step above where they were as true freshmen. And also Jalen Harrell flashes as well last year, a name to watch. So again, it helps that a lot of the offensive line is a relatively known commodity. that takes a lot of question of like, okay, defensive line is doing well, but how good is this offensive line really, right? Because we know the offensive line, we know a lot of those names, it's going to be a lot easier to judge the defensive line performance based off of that known commodity. So those are my top three. A couple caveats here, things to keep in mind with this top three. You always need to take spring games with a grain of salt. If one position group is looking exceptionally well, performing really, really well on the spring game, you have to remember it's also Michigan on the other side of the ball as well. Quick example here. Let's take the wide receiver versus cornerback performance. If cornerbacks are performing extremely well, locking up the wide receivers, that's great, but how good are the wide receivers they're going against, right? In this example, for this team, for the 2022 season, I'm pretty confident Michigan's wide receiver group is going to be pretty good. Judging the cornerback performance based off of that holds more weight because I know the strength of the wide receiver room. And that's something you need to consider, right? What does the opposition of that position group, what does that look like? And how many questions are there about that unit that position group is going up against, right? Final thing, it's one day, all right? This is one small, tiny, itsy-bitsy glimpse into these players. It's early on in some of their careers, right? Getting this experience. Mistakes are going to be made, right? And this is the time to catch those mistakes. And coaches often want to put them in these pressure situations to have those mistakes made now so you have a teaching opportunity for later. So sometimes guys just have bad days, even if it's not a young guy and it's a veteran, right? You can't judge people from a single performance. It's a glimpse, not a definition. Okay, that's all I have. I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what position groups, what sort of people, what players, what are you going to be watching heading into this spring game, heading into the 2022 season, All right, before I stumble over my words again, appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to watch this video. Stay safe out there. And as always, go blue.